Ja, liebe anwesende Gäste, herzlich willkommen zur Fokusveranstaltung CouraTecture Courage for a New Architecture der Architekturdialoge. Architekturdialoge ist eine Stiftung, welche seit 14 Jahren von einer Gruppe von Architekturengagierten geführt wird. Wir sind die Plattform für Baukultur und freuen uns, Sie heute an der Swissbau begrüßen zu dürfen. Unser Ziel ist es, zeitgenössische Architektur für Fachleute und Laien in verschiedenen Formen und Gefäßen zugänglich zu machen. Unsere Engagements beinhalten das Organisieren und Durchführen von Veranstaltungen, Vorträgen, Diskussionen, Podien. Wir haben auch eine Agenda, welche Sie über das Architekturgeschehen, Veranstaltungswesen in der Architektur bestens und immer kostenlos informiert. Es freut uns natürlich, dass wir diese Vortragsreihe jeweils und seit Jahren an der Swissbau durchführen können. Dear lecturers and panelists, welcome to the Podium, CouraTecture Courage for a New Architecture. We appreciate very much that you are here at this interdisciplinary melting point of thinking, planning and building. This year's theme, Trial and Error, Mut für Neues, made us to invent this term, CouraTecture Courage for a New Architecture, and to invite 3 courageous panelists. The structural engineer Dr. Professor Mike Schlaich von Schlaich Bergermann Partner in Stuttgart, the leader of Arup's research and innovation team, Dr. Wurm, and the architect Fujimoto from Tokyo and Paris. We will start the keynote lectures with Dr. Mike Schlaich. He is trained as a civil engineer. He is professor and managing partner of Schlaich Bergermann Partner with headquarters in Stuttgart and branches in Berlin, New York, Sao Paulo, Shanghai and Paris. Mike Schlaich focuses on the design, planning and supervision of construction work for rather sub-areas of structural engineering, such as membrane, shells, glass, roof and facade, bridges, cable constructions, but also towers and high-rise buildings. In addition, the office has its own research area for the development of technologies for solar power generation and is consulting also for renewable energies. Please welcome Mike Schlaich with Trial, Light and Error anpassungsfähig. Thank you.
Soll ich jetzt auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch?
Englisch.
Okay. Guten Morgen, good morning. Initially, I thought it was in German, but I'll switch to English, no problem. And I have also changed the title of the lecture, no problem. There is so many words in this invitation I got. Mut für neues Bauen, Fehlerkultur, Fehlertoleranz, trial and error. It's difficult to find something that could be entertaining for you, and I thought, well, why not shells? Because shells are mutig, are courageous structures in the sense that they're lightweight, that they're efficient, and that they fit very well in the today's discussion regarding climate change and sustainability. And I think this is the governing theme of everything I'm dealing with these days. It's nothing new. Shells are not really new, so Mut zu neuer Architektur. I would say Mut zu neuem Bauen, because as a structural engineer, it's more than only architecture. And who knows, perhaps there will be a renaissance of shells. Also, I think Mut, courage is not enough. It's necessary and it's very helpful, but most of all, we need ideas. Otherwise, if you're just mutig, you might go the wrong direction. And that's why I think it's important to also look at history, at our own office's history, and that's how I will start in a minute, but also at the history of our profession and see where the heroes were and how courageous they were. And also, I think we should distinguish now I have to say this in German, I'm sorry, between mutig and übermütig, between mutig, Mut und Zumutung, because sometimes architecture or engineering can be eine Zumutung, because someone went too far, was übermütig. So I think it's a very interesting overall subject, and so I think looking back at history helps us not only to find courage, but also to source ideas in a sense. And this is a bit how I'll structured my lecture. I'll look at my own history. I'll give you a glimpse on lightweight structures, because I think lightweight structures are the ones that need most courage and that help us to save resources. And eventually, I show you one small project where I collected all my courage and tried something slightly new, based on old stuff. So here are two very courageous gentlemen, Jörg Schlaich and Rudi Bergermann, who started our office some 40 years ago. And this is what we can rely on the next generation. And this is also related to tolerance, Fehlertoleranz, to courage, that someone who has an office is courageous enough to hand it over and not to mingle. And I think we were very lucky to have these two founders of the office who helped us to now grow, but grow in a slow pace, but grow worldwide, because our business today is global, and we have to be courageous enough to work with different codes. We have to be courageous enough to work in different cultures, and this is also related to Fehlertoleranz. And then you have to communicate between different cultures, the Chinese office with the Paris office, and this is why we meet once a year. You can still do that if you're less than 200 people, then we all meet. Well, we have to fly, I must admit, but I think it's so important to get to know each other and speak to each other, to communicate. Communication is one fundamental subject to avoid errors in general. Then we look at our history, we look where we come from, and our office has roots, and everyone has roots, and I think it's very important to be aware of the roots. And in this case, it's definitely the Olympic Stadium roof in Munich, lightweight structure and still impressive today. Lightweight bridges, a bridge in Calcutta built with local people, local material, local construction methods, all riveted in the 70s, because at that time there was little weldable steel in Calcutta. And solar energy. This has been a part of our office work for decades. The solar chimney, a glass roof where the sun heats the air, the warm air wants to go up in the chimney, and then there is a turbine. That's the only prototype that got built, a real failure. It never got through, but it somehow stimulated us. So also failure can stimulate and give you more courage. And we have started a group of solar energy engineering that produces heat, and this heat can then be used to produce electricity. So there's tens of thousands of mirrors that focus on one central receiver and produce 1,000 degrees Celsius and produce what we need a lot in the future. But this is solar thermal energy, and perhaps solar thermal energy is now dying because PV, photovoltaics, are so cheap. And that's why we're now thinking of going back to the solar chimney and combine it with PV, so that the outer ring produces a lot of photovoltaic, and the electricity and the draft of the wind below cools the PV and increases its efficiency. So it's all interconnected when you look at your history and what happened before. We do not have enough solar energy yet, so we have to save heating energy. And we do this in a way that is appalling. Wärmedämmverbundsystem. The Germans do it, as you see it on the right side. The Swiss cheat in a much more elegant way. You see this chalet in the valleys, Chandelin. No? Looks like it's a timber building. It looks like it's a stone foundation, but if you look closely, it's all very thin ornament. And the barbarians in Germany, they just glue everything together and create a lot of waste. I think we have to do a lot here, and we need a lot of courage to get rid of all that. At the Berlin University, we are developing something that we have learned from Swiss colleagues, working with very lightweight concrete. We call it infra-lightweight concrete. And we want to build very lightweight in the future like that. So imagine in the future, if there's no energy a problem anymore, we can build very lightweight like that again, and we can build shells. I see that I'm running out of time. I have to speed up. I'm sorry. So shells, this is the title of my lecture. Very lightweight structures. I think that's the future. And we should all go and look at shells. So that's me on Xochimilco Candela's shell. And Candela was amazing. He built these hyperbolic paraboloids all over the place in Mexico, but not only the roofs. Look at the foundation. Also, the foundation was a hyperbolic paraboloid. It was built like that. This is really saving energy and resources. You know? So I think we can learn a lot from history and be courageous again and build like that. You know, and build this. Again, there was one my father did in the 70s, 1.5 centimeters, built with shotcrete fiber reinforced concrete. So a lot to learn from history. And then naturally there's the famous Heinz Isler, who I admired so much, who I still admire with his 60s shells, and who came to the ETH where I studied once upon a time and showed us these wonderful slides, but there's no time to go into it. But I learned a lot from Heinz Isler, that's for sure. And today we are building shells all over the place, big shells, or shells now with membranes and cables and stadium roofs with membranes. So what the message is, shells are not only concrete shells today, we can do glass grid shells, we can do cable nets, we can do membrane roofs, all very lightweight, very efficient, very resource conscious in a way. Now I understand that the clock goes backwards, so I still have 12 minutes. I thought it was 14 minutes already. Oh, okay, now I slow down again. Well, anyway, the message is here. Lightweight structures. No, this is really where we should go to. And there is the concrete shells that we can learn so much from, double curved, highly efficient, resource saving, and the glass roofs and the cable nets and the membrane structures. I think we should go, we must go this way. We have to be courageous enough to build in a different way, because there's just not enough material left. And just as, say, a small manifesto, we tried to build a shell bridge. We wanted to see if you can build a shell bridge where you can actually walk on the shell, not like Museveci in Italy, where you had all kinds of concrete shells and then there was a straight slab on top. So we, together with Trumpf, the client, Trumpf factory in southern Germany, we built a shell bridge that is, what is it? I think, I don't know, five times or 6 times thinner than an eggshell. It's a 30-meter steel bridge, stainless steel bridge with only 20-meter thickness. And it's all started with a 2-kilo orange bag from a German supermarket. Because the orange bags are wonderful quadrilateral meshes, and if you stress them, they cannot transmit shear. They can only work by stretching along the path of the main membrane forces. And therefore, if you stress it, if you stretch it, the net will show the flow of forces. There is no shear, only principal membrane forces. So what you see here is the form-finding process in a very traditional way. You see this little, wooden plate that pushes it up. So that's the principal load case that gives the net its shape. And it corresponds to the full life load, just the other way around. It pushes the net up, and it puts the net all in tension. So if you would put the load the other way around, if the life load would go down this way, then the shape would stay exactly the same, the flow of forces would stay exactly the same, but it would go from tension into compression. So it was like Gaudi, you know, you built it as a hanging structure, and then you turn it upside down. In this case, we didn't turn it upside down, we changed the forces and turned the forces upside down. And we wanted to build a bridge like that. But you can only do this with all these holes if you have very modern tools, you know, Grasshopper, Rhino, parametric design, all that. So what I find very intriguing is this combination, new building, new structures with very traditional form-finding methods, and then parametric design like that. How do you fabricate that? The owner, the client, Trumpf, does actually sell laser cutting machine. That came in very handy. So you put a 6 by 3 meter stainless steel plate into one of these machines, and what comes out is this laser cut plate. Very high tech. So it's like a bit like Reagan's Star Wars. You know, you can cut with lasers 20, 30 millimeter steel plates. But then it was combined again with very old-fashioned traditional methods. Is the movie running? Can we start the movie here? Well, I cannot do it. Yeah, now it's running. There's not much to see, but we went to a shipbuilding yard, and there's people who, by squeezing, by plastically deforming the metal, by giving it shape as you see it here, and testing with these timber plates, they're used to building ships, and they were forming these laser-cut steel plates within days. They deformed and double curved the entire bridge. I go to the next one. Then it was all assembled. It's so soft, it's like a piece of paper. It's 30 meters and only 20 millimeter thickness. It would not have been possible to lift it without the steel frame that you see underneath. That is the only way to move a shell without its supports. But the moment it was put on its supports, it was extremely stable. It was as stable as an eggshell. You could walk on it and it would not at all vibrate. So this is the moment where the bridge is landing on the 4 supports. And I went quickly through that before. This was the copy of the Xochimilco shell of Candela that my father did in the 70s. And this shell is supported on spherical bearings like that. So we also paid tribute to our own history in a way, and also supported our little bridge on little spherical bearings. So this is the spherical bearings of the shell bridge. And it's about failure tolerance in the real sense. You know, here you see that you can adjust the bearing so that any tolerance in the concrete work and in the steel work can be adjusted by a mortar bed behind the bearing. And this is the other part. This is how the bridge comes onto the bearing. So it's a real hinge that can really move. And this is how we play with our history and play with shells. So this was how the bridge looked once it was on its supports. No railing, and we were very worried about the railings because 1.20 meter of railing can destroy a 20 millimeter thick bridge. But fortunately, we got some museums glass, this very low reflective glass, and then this picture proves that the railing is hardly visible, and it shows that a bridge can be built with 30 meter length, 20 millimeter thickness as a shell, where you see the flow of forces because you played with the net of oranges from the supermarket. And I'm not claiming that all the bridges should be like that, but I'm claiming that we should be conscious in a way with our work and try new types of solutions. You see, we also drilled holes in the deck, so where you walk, there's also holes, but they would not have looked as wide and clear as they do right now, if we would have just drilled holes, because the holes are very dull gray drillings. So we put in little plugs, little glass plugs, like the Stöpsel of an Olivenölflasche. And this is now reflecting the light. So we have 15,000 little glass plugs in the walkway, and that makes it as reflective as you see. And then if you light it at night, you see it the other way around. So that was the last one. Courage, Mut für neues Bauen, shells, looking at our history, learning from history, and perhaps in the future we can build more lightweight structures. We can even build bridges like shells. Thank you very much.
Danke vielmals. Ja, herzlichen Dank. And now we will hear the next keynote from Jan Wurm. Jan is the leader of Research and Innovation Europe of Arup in Berlin. As Europe's leading research and innovation company, Arup strives to manage the transformation process in such a way that planning and construction benefit from the opportunities that present themselves. Jan focuses on research that addresses the key challenges in the built environment and connects technical experts with world-class academic and industrial partners. He has developed successful product innovations, including the self-supporting BioBuild facade panel and the solar leaf facade, a closed-loop facade system. Welcome, Jan Wurm. Alles Gute.
Good morning. It's great to be on the stage in this fantastic panel. And I think I've naturally fit in between Mike as an engineer and you as an architect, Sue. And me having studied architecture but then have done a PhD in a structural engineering department are probably in between. And I think being in between is something that also requires some courage, as naturally on the side of the architects, you would be questioned whether you are part of the discipline of architecture, haven't got an own architectural oeuvre that qualifies you to be an architect. And on the other side, in the community of engineers, would be questioned on my possibility to design structures, which I frankly don't have. However, I would encourage you to look for these interfaces between disciplines, where disciplines meet, because I think there's a wealth of topics to be explored, and it's an exciting place to be for applying research and to work. And I think looking at the descriptions and professions in the built environment, architect, engineer, scientist, I think these boundaries are blurring. And I think we need more people to work in between those disciplines and to integrate in order to develop further and to come up with innovation. So that's why I chose also the topic of applying research. And so in the German context, there are a number of leading institutions, I think, doing world-class research, as obviously there are in Switzerland, headed by Lausanne and Zurich. However, I do feel between the research that has been carried out in the university and what we see applied is what we call the valley of death. So very few of those great ideas and innovations actually make it to be applied in the bigger scale, in the commercial context of our practice. So I think applying research for me is a real key topic, which I want to talk a little bit about, how you could do it and maybe elaborate a little bit, helping you to trying to push those boundaries in your practice. I work for Arup. It's an engineering practice founded shortly after the war, starting with structural engineering, and nowadays a practice which includes almost every discipline and expertise you would need in order to design, from all the architecture disciplines, engineering disciplines, highway, energy, water. And I think one of the sort of the lighthouse projects, which still informs also the culture in the firm, is the Sydney Opera House, where a fantastic design by Johan Utzon was winning a competition in the 50s with a shell structure. However, a shell which could not work as a shell due to the geometry and the boundary conditions. And it took 15 years to build and 10 years to design, while the construction was ongoing, to find a solution. So while the excavations were going on, while the foundations were being laid, there was no solution for building the roof. So you were really on a moving target all the time, and I think it needs great courage and determination to take it all the way through, and to develop then a structure of post-tensioned concrete ribs to form the roof. And another thing enabling finding a solution was the first application, I think, of computational design and shape optimization. So I am working in a different field, on the field of foresight research innovation. It's a small team within Arup, which more looks at the strategic design of product solutions, strategies, whether it's for companies that have product services, or even in the context of a bigger master plan, to take all the way through from the sort of visioning and understanding of change which is happening, what the relevance of this change is for a certain project or client, to then trying to make prototypes, test it, and bring it into real life. And I think change is probably the key word here. And I think we all feel that the rate of changing is increasing, and the change around us is feeling sometimes uncomfortable. And Mike, you mentioned it. I think one thing which is undoubtable, of course, is climate change, and we are all aware of it. I think, although some of the world leaders are still in denial, and yeah, literally the planet is burning. We are on a burning platform, which means there is a sense of urgency to change the way we do things, we design things, and the carbon footprint of our own work, of our architecture and engineering products. At the same time, yeah, we exploit the resources to sustain our lifestyle, to sustain the growth, and there have to be new solutions to be more carbon neutral, to sustain an economy which is decoupled from using resources. So our current economic system is based on the extraction of resources, increasing value, and then and creating waste, that we have to decouple our own wealth from this logic. There are social changes, obviously, in our community about the big divide between cities and rural areas, between younger and older people, access to knowledge. And all of these things define also the way we design, and we have to design, and what we have to design. And as I mentioned, I think now there is this clear sense of urgency, which has now, I think, reached all parts of the society. And there is a feeling we cannot wait for everything to be solved by policies, incentives, rules, regulations, but we have to take it in our own hands. We all have to explore possible solutions before someone else has come up with them. And we do work in the fantastic field, I think, of building and building for people, building a space for societies to meet and to prosper. However, our industry is so reluctant to change. Over the last 20 years, productivity levels haven't increased. There we still, our productivity levels are as 20 years ago. The level of digitization is on the level of, even below the level of agriculture. The fragmentation of our industry is very, very, is hindering innovation and collaboration. And it's not a very attractive place to be on a building site. So we do lack skilled labor. So what does all of this mean for us? And we need to explore. We need to open the mind and think free. We have to be critical. We have to be inquisitive. We have to be creative and experiment. And the question is, where is that safe space for you to try these ideas, to have a thought experiment, to do a prototype? So where is that safe space, and what do you actually need to do that? I don't think it's a jump of faith, or it's a leap of faith by an individual that has the courage to jump and hope it will land on a safe space. But for sure, it's something we have to do together across all disciplines to help ourselves, to give us support. It's a long journey to cross this valley of death, and we can't do it on our own, and we have to prepare for it. We have to have the right resources. So courage, in a way, is important because you don't know where you're going. It's an unknown journey. Courage doesn't mean to take a risk which puts yourself at danger or puts someone else at danger. So I think the definition of courage in that context for me is important. We do that very strategically in important projects. That before we kick off a project, we do the sort of inception review where we leave the office, we invite friends, some critical minds, in a space which is a good space to be, because you're probably somewhere in the countryside, and really think through, what does this project mean? Where do we want to go? Where does every individual want to go? What does our client need? And how we bring that together. This day is very, very important, because when the project starts and you're under pressure of deliverables, of resources, you will go back and think about what we have defined and to be able to go back to us and help in that journey. We do that also for our young, talented engineers and designers that join the firm. We take them on something we call Design School. It's a week where we bring people from all over the world together with some of our leading designers and experts and really try to think outside the box and really empower them to ask these questions. And not just to take a brief for natural, but really think outside the box. And we use the design thinking methodology and the systems thinking methodology to help them to create that confidence that you can do that at any time. And of course, work of universities and the education is so important because that is a safe space, or it should be a safe space to explore ideas outside standards and norms. And I had the pleasure to be one of the jury members for the Solar Decathlon last year in Hungary. Amazing, what a group of students can do within few weeks, putting all their resources into it, really exploring something, building it, presenting it, and very proudly presenting it in the scale of one-to-one. And I think these experiences you do, doing something one-to-one, is incredibly helpful in contrast to the research you do in a university context and maybe some of the practice you do. Of course, we are very jealous. I'm very jealous of the ETH and of this fantastic idea of having a platform where you can try out ideas one-to-one in the nest, where you have a possibility to jump that gap between research and applying it in the real context. So I think that's a fantastic help. We in Arup, we do not have a physical space. We do not have a lab. But what we do have is a physical space, a virtual space of funding ideas and collaborating. It's not a very easy thing to read. It's an internal thing. So don't take pictures and put it on your Instagram or where. But it's a funding platform where every single member of the membership and our firm is owned by the members. So there is not a single person owning the company. It's a trust. So every member of the trust, meaning every employee, can say, I have an idea. I need something to explore. I want to explore it with this person or with this person in that context because it's relevant. And you can send a really quick application, which maybe takes 2-3 hours, and ask for that funding to buy you that free headspace. And you see a little bit, this is this year ongoing. So there are some significant investments we do, which comes from our profit, obviously, of last year, and we reinvested in these programs. And it's not just from the top down, where a group leader would say, let's do this, and I think it's important to say everyone can do. And then there are different funds to explain everywhere where you see that little pen. You as an employee can tick and send an application, say this is what I want to do. I want to learn something, I want to create a venture, I want to research something. And this is a list of the projects I have been involved in, and it's much longer. I will show you some of those quickly. And the sort of underlying spirit is don't ask for permission, but ask for forgiveness if you fail. So I think having that spirit, you can do, you can try, you can make mistakes is crucial in this sort of complex environment. I will show you a number of projects dealing around the material impact and using other materials, bio-based natural materials to decrease the carbon footprint. To replace heavy materials, carbon-intensive materials like concrete and steel. Concrete is a fantastic material. It's very popular. It has many benefits, but it also, once it's cured, the carbon invested, and it's about 7% of the worldwide emissions, which is only related to the concrete industry, will never be reclaimed again. So that carbon is something you have released, which will never be able to claim back. And so I think for us it's important to find alternatives to this concrete multi-story construction. And one thing we have been working on for now 10 years with different partners is the timber concrete composite slab, where we reduce the thickness of the concrete slab for 8-meter span, maybe to a third, by connecting it in a shear connection with timber beams to allow a span of 8 meters, maybe with a concrete deck of 12 centimeters, which is still good enough for acoustics, good enough for fire, but in terms of the mechanical performance, that's all it needs. And I think the key thing here was the collaboration very early on. It was funded by the Austrian research grant And we were together with timber contractors, architects, and a real contractor, Romberg, who wanted to bring this on the market. So it was a real commercial idea. And I think having this team together from the beginning is really key to be able to bring it actually on the market and make a real difference. This is some images from the first prototype where we were not directly involved. We were involved in the first initial stage of research. And of course, the risk associated is the fire risk, what happens, increasing fire load if you have built 20 stories. So it has to be tested one-to-one, and fundamentally this building is not in any way least safe than a conventional building if you apply a certain combination of measures which can be engineered. Another thing to push it even forward, because if we make timber, we build timber. Timber uses 80 years maybe to grow, a pine tree or a Douglas fir tree. So if we talk about short carbon cycles to store as much and as fast as we can carbon into the construction, timber is good, but it's not really good. So we need to find ways to use plants which are much faster, and like jute or flax, which take 2 years to grow. Now, with those natural fibers, you can hardly build something. Well, that was the question. What can you do with these fibers? And in a bigger European consortium, we looked at natural fibers, natural resins, and we worked on natural composites, biocomposites, where you bring them together to make panels and combine it with other core materials like cork. We used the collaboration with GXN, with some academic institutions, to develop a unitized facade system in this folded geometry. We did one-to-one prototypes. We tested it to the European standards. However, this one clearly got lost in this big death because the risks involved were too high. There was not a single contractor willing to take that risk. So it was a good research. We demonstrated the technical feasibility, but here we go. It hasn't had the impact I think we were hoping for. So for this project, we went for a very different approach. We didn't go for the big European funding structure. We went for a very small, agile team, I would say, where we prototype tested very, very quickly with a biotech startup called Mogu that have developed processes to turn substrates of agricultural waste material, combining it with mycelium to grow panels, to make panels, interior fit-out panels. You could replace drywall construction. And this is a video where we see the growth of this, where the mycelium grows on this substrate, absorbs the glucose in the fibers, and starts cross-branching in 3 dimensions to really create a relatively stiff biocomposite panel in a number of days, in just a few days, with very little energy involved. So it needs room temperature, 60% of relative humidity to trigger this process, and then it needs 80 degrees to stop the process, and then you have a biocomposite panel you can use for the fit-out. And here you see some examples. We did some more research growing it into an untreated timber frame to use it as a construction system. The mycelium does what it wants to do. You have to understand it. You have to control the process to be able to replicate it, to really have a product of proven performance. And we developed some construction DIY systems to help the implementation. And we're working now with the designer Jonas Edward in Copenhagen to explore much more the sort of possibilities of using these materials for interior applications. Last but not least, this project is interesting because it is one of the successful projects where you had a very sort of idea outside the given the knowledge available, and within 3 years applied it on the project. And it was within the framework of an international building exhibition where there was some innovation funding, $500,000, to invest into ideas which are not developed. So the idea of having a facade to cultivate microalgae, to absorb the carbon, to produce heat, produce high-value biomass for the food or pharmaceutical industry, now is an idea which was maybe conceptual there in 2009 when we did the competition, but no way research done, tested, zero. So within these 3 years, we did the research, we funded the consortium, we brought industry partners in, we got industry funding, we got government funding, we got the private investor for the building. We had to agree on a fail scenario where all this thing wouldn't work. So all the panels are within 1 bolt per story, where you could completely take it out, and then you had a conventional building. So creating all these sort of devices to help everyone to feel safe in this journey, not to put everything on one card was really key in the process of getting it there. Here you see the panel, which of course is a very different appearance to other facade panels, which includes a living organism which had also needs, which you have to balance with, of course, the needs of the building users. And we did some more further research in bringing that into more conventional facade systems. So here are my questions. Now I showed some projects where we had a safe space, I think, where we could elaborate these ideas, where we did that together in the right team, along the value chain, bringing the right expertise. So where is your safe space to do this? What is the topic you want to explore? Who do you need? Which expert do you need? Which friend or partner in crime would you need? And what sort of funding do you need from whom to bring this idea a step further? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. And now we will finish the keynote lectures with Su Fujimoto. Su is considered the most important Japanese architect of the younger generation. He is inspired by organic structure and explores the boundaries between the natural nature and the built environment, and develops fascinating visions for architecture of the future. Su Fujimoto has offices in Tokyo and Paris. His works include the Serpentine Gallery in London a few years ago, the House of Hungarian Music, and the Village Vertical in Grand Paris. Su is also working in Switzerland currently. Construction began of the HSG Learning Center in St. Gallen, and in Zurich he is planning the project Meet at Airport City Zurich. Please welcome Su with a warm applause between nature and architecture. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Okay, yeah, I'm very happy to be here again, come back to Basel, the city of architecture. And yeah, really great honor to have a keynote speech here. Yeah, I like to talk about the relationship between nature and architecture because it is relating to my personal background. I was born and grown up in Hokkaido, it's a northern island of Japan, and yeah, full of nature. So in my childhood days, I was playing around in the forest and grown up until high school days. And then when I get into the university, I moved to Tokyo, which is completely opposite, like this. And then I learned architecture, and now I have an office in Tokyo, and I'm living there. So those two extremely different situations, both of them are my background. And I love both of them. And I like to think about both of them as important, as equal. And that is why I like to create like a good relationship between nature and architecture, and if possible, like to integrate them in a very different way. And especially when we think about the architecture and the nature, it is not only about the green and the buildings, but it's also, for example, about the relationship inside and outside, or the relationship between simplicity and complexity, and so on. So it is always relating to the fundamentals of architectural thinking. And this is the examples from London. It's already 7 years ago. The small pavilion in London. And you can see it's surrounded by beautiful green, and our pavilion is made by the white thin steel structures. So it is really creating a contrast between the nature and architecture. But at the same time, the structure itself it's quite straight and 90-degree geometry, so super artificial, but at the same time it looks like a cloud. And it is providing various different places for people where they can find their own comfortable spaces. So it is something beyond the normal definition of the functions. It's more like a positive interaction between your feelings and the spaces. and creative interventions by people to the spaces. So those kind of and then you can see how transparencies and opaqueness is gradually changed, changing. It's not like strong walls and the rectangle windows, but it's organically changing transparencies. Depends on your positions and depends on which directions you see. So it's again the relationship between inside and outside, or the relationship between the nature and architectures, is always reorganized by you, by people. And that is quite important point, I think. And it is always inspire people to move around, to stay there. So providing such a place for people between the nature and architecture. And you can see this is really simple in a sense, but at the same time it's really complex. And the balances and the relationship between the simplicity and complexity is always the topics we have for the nature and we have for the architecture. So I believe there is a key to integrate nature and architecture through the simplicity and complexity. And this is a rather different project, huge scale in the Middle East. This was just a proposals. And every time, because architecture design, every time the site, the climate conditions, the programs, and the scales and clients, it's always different. Every time, everything is new. And then you have to do, as the main theme of this talk shows, you have to try and some errors, and then you have to retry, to redefine what architecture is. And in this case, for us at the time, the new conditions, as the climate conditions and the scales of the buildings, this whole site is 1.2 kilometers, so it's so huge. And the program was a shopping mall, huge shopping mall. I've never done. And the cultural background is so different. So that was quite exciting challenges. And finally, we proposed those several towers as a landmark because the plot was really flat in the desert. But this landmark tower was not just an object. It has the atrium inside, huge atrium, which is like the solar chimney, which bring the cool air in from the bottom, and then the hot air is going up to create the flow of the air, which is like a reaction to their climate conditions and creating such a natural flow of the air by the structures of the buildings. And this is the atriums. And then, of course, we respected the historical shape of the arches, of the architectures. So we try to reinvent arches by our contemporary way, and then repeat it again and again and again to create the whole structures. And finally, it is like something connecting to the history, but at the same time something really new. And as a structure, as a visually, it is, I believe it's beautiful, but it is also it has a functions as like a sun protections, because the glass line is set back from the surfaces. So the whole structure and this kind of the mesh-like layers of these patterns is creating the screen and filtering the sunlight to protect the strong sunlight of that areas. So it is like the integration of the structure and the sustainability strategies and the histories, and then of course the function of the shopping malls, and then the scales, and so on. So every time those kind of the reintegration of scattered various different conditions, each different conditions of the project should be reintegrated in a very simple way. That is excitement of the architecture. And also, interesting point of this project is, if you remove all the arches and the circular shapes, then you will find this is almost the same structure as the Serpentine Pavilion, but in a very different scales. It's just a repetition of the grids. Sometimes the double grids and the triple grids, but it's just a repetition. But scale is so different. Serpentine is really tiny, and this is too huge. But it was achieved finally by unexpected way, because we didn't thought okay, we can expand the Serpentine Pavilion to create such a shopping center, but we just try to struggle to react to the new climate conditions for us and the new programs and new scales. And finally, we found out it's so different, but still it has a consistent thinkings of those repetition of the grids from the Serpentine Pavilions to this Middle East huge shopping center. And after such a try and errors, we reached to that point unexpectedly. And we found out the potential, hidden potential of our previous ideas of the Serpentine could be developed into such a huge scales. And then we are now working in Philippines for the other development of the grids and the frames in such a different way. This is in Philippines, and as you know, the Philippines is a tropical climate and strong sunlight, and then the requirement was almost 100-meter high, like a residential tower. And we thought about the normal tower with a glass facade, and it's obviously it's not fitting to their climate conditions. So we try to inverse the inside and outside to push out all of those kind of branches of the frames to create such a protections of the sunlight, but at the same time providing such a nice exterior spaces even in such a high-rise buildings. So it is like a attached exterior spaces or many branches spread around to create the proper protections from the sunlight. So this is the concept. It's not just a green tower. It is like the whole facade has like a depth and the place for the people, but at the same time many frames and the greens to protect the sunlight. So the whole high-rise buildings will be protected and covered by such a soft structures and soft greens to create the better living environment. So it is like the new trial to reinvent the high-rise building in such a different climate conditions and different cultural background. So this is the diagrams to show how diverse those extended frames could be used in the high-rise. And then those kind of the sustainable devices could be integrated. And at the same time, many open terraces, large terraces could be provided. So this is, of course, as a shape or as a principle, it is like a repetition of the grids. But it is not just the copy and paste of the ideas, but always like the reaction, encounter with unexpected different situations, the background and the climate conditions and the lifestyles, and then try and errors to find out the proper form. Simplicity could provide the complexity and so on. And this is the project in France we just finished, which has such a branches. But these branches is made by the huge terraces, surfaces, because the city of Montpellier, the location is the Mediterranean city. So their climate is quite wonderful. Even in the wintertime, these seasons, they can have a lunch on the outdoor terraces. That is, fantastic. And then they have been doing those kind of a fantastic lifestyle for many years and hundreds of years. So we like to respect their traditions and the lifestyle, and then try to reinterpret their tradition, their climate, and their lifestyles into the contemporary architectures in a new way. And finally, we proposed such a huge balconies sticking out, the 50-meter high high-rise buildings, one of the tallest building in the city. But still, they have like a huge outdoor terraces on every floors, on every houses. Not only one terraces, one apartment, but the 2-3 balconies for each apartment, which is almost like sometimes bigger than the interior spaces. And yes, this is a view from the balcony. And we prepare the green areas, but the people who start to live there, they can bring whatever they like. The more trees or some furnitures or parasols or some sculptures, anything. And then each balcony has its own life and has its own characters. That must be very, very exciting. It is again like inversing the apartment prototype, because normally most of the housing has like a diversities of the lifestyles packed inside of the buildings, and then outside it's a bit like closed. So we try to inverse. The life could be more exposed to create the characteristics of the whole buildings as it is, and creating a communications between one apartment to the other apartment through those kind of terraces, and then which is like a recreation of like soft neighborhood, the communities between neighbors to the neighbors, which is also like a counter proposals of the normal housing typologies, which is closed, and then we don't know who are the neighbors, and you don't have the communications. In this project, yeah, you can have the proper distances between each balconies, but at the same time, you can have like a nice communications visually, and actually, you can have a conversation through the balconies. So it's not only about the shape, it's not only about the lifestyles on each balconies, but it is also the proposals to recreate or regain such a wonderful communities, even in such a high-rise buildings. And then this is also like could be the landmark, but it's not the landmark by such a uniqueness of the shape of the buildings, but it should be the landmark because the whole lifestyle of this city are layouted three-dimensionally, like a tower shape. So it's like a presentation of how the life of Montpellier or how the life in Mediterranean climate is wonderful. So this is like the landmark, not by the object, but the landmark as the lifestyle itself. And this is the last project I showed today, which is should be in Paris. And then Paris is the city of history, of course. So in here, not only about the nature and architecture, but I also like to think about the history and the future, or old things and the new things. And in the city of Paris, they have been preserving such a crazy historical, wonderful city, but at the same time, they have been introducing every time really new things in the middle of the Paris, like the Centre Pompidou or the pyramids in the Louvre. So that is like the vitalizing the whole city. History, vitalizing the history and the new things together. So we try to respect those kind of the tradition of the city of Paris, respecting the history, but at the same time bringing really something new. And the title of this project is 1000 Tree in French, the 1000 arbres. And the concept is bringing the floating forest in the city of Paris. And as you know, the city of Paris has the height limitation. So the whole city has a 30-meter, 35-meter like harmonies. And then our site has also such the height limitations. So we, of course, we respect that, but at the same time, we replace the stone buildings by the floating forest. So harmonized with the height limitations, but at the same time, completely new feature, new green things are floating above, and which is creating the nice contrast and harmony at the same time. And then on the rooftop, yeah, as you can see, we have a floating forest, but within the forest, we have the many, many houses, like villages. And then there is another kind of a nice contrast and harmony, because the city of Paris has like most of the buildings is the building block, urban block, and apartment. And then we try to bring such a tiny scales of the villages to create the contrast of the lifestyles and the scales between these buildings and the surroundings, which is like again, vitalize or make the existing building blocks beautiful, and then, on the contrast, make these new buildings quite interesting. And then, like a reflecting from one to the other, to each other, to create the positive, the interrelationships between the history and the new, and the big scales and the small scales, to create such the harmony. And then, of course, this is Paris. And then, because of the height limitations, you can see from this forest, from this village, through the green forest, and then suddenly the Eiffel Tower is there. This is possible because of the structure of the city of Paris, but this has never done. But now, so it is like a hidden potential of the city of Paris. You can see wonderful green forest, and then the Eiffel Tower together, which has been the hidden potential of the city of Paris. And then we now open the possibilities to combine beautiful forest and the Eiffel Towers in the middle of the city. So on every different aspects, we try to create such kind of the contrast of the old and the new, smalls and the large scales, and the forest and Eiffel Towers, and so on, to create the tight relationships to each other. So throughout the whole project, I'm very excited to think about the nature and architecture, but it's not just the green and the buildings. It is, as I said, it's the relationships, the positive new relationships between inside and outside, which means the relationships of the privacy, private areas and the public areas, and also which is like the simplicity and the complexity, and also the history and the new things, future, and also reacting to the different climate conditions, different lifestyle, different traditions, and so on. So every time come from this point to the other point and come back to make the more tight new relationships to each other. That must be the future, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Now we start the panel since years with Judit Solt that moderates it. Please come onto the stage. And of course, we are curious how the future and courage for a new architecture can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, please, dear guests, come. Maybe you can sit here.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Take a seat. Thank you very, very much for those really inspiring lectures. I mean, I'm just tantalized, and it's quite difficult to find a beginning, but I think I would like to start with the thing that you, Jan Wurm, mentioned, because it's always a question you have to ask yourself if you want to find new ideas, if you really want to think out of the box. You need a reason to do so, because if you leave the comfort zone of your knowledge, of what you have ever done, of your habits, then you need courage, you need partners, but you also need a reason to do so. And sometimes you have a very good reason, I mean ideologic reasons, or maybe an urge, a need to do so, maybe someone makes you do so, but sometimes I think you just really would like to. And then you need a strategy. And you told us that in your firm you have kind of a strategy to help people to find a safe place where they can think really freely and where they can find the courage to leave their habits and try to find new ideas and new methods also. And my question to you both is, do you also have this method? I mean, in your firm it's quite it's quite far because you also have funding and everything. You really have a structure that works. And how is it in your offices? Do you also have kind of innovation groups? Maybe you first, please. Mike?
Well, in a way, we do innovation by projects. So we try in every project to go one step further. But as Jan said, there's sometimes some residual ideas that could not be brought into practice. So we have a internal website which is called SBP Free, where you can freely put your ideas, and then they are collected, and there's a group that evaluates these ideas. And then we also allocate time. We say, look, this is a good idea. Perhaps this could become a master thesis. So you have 2 weeks to develop it so that we can advertise it as a master thesis. Or this is so important, we really have to invest a lot of money and create a new optimizing form-finding program or so. So we have this board of ideas that could not have been realized in a project, and that gets collected and then discussed internally.
Mm-hmm. So you really work actively with potentially new ideas that you could put into practice.
All the time,
yes.
But I think it's the most important is to really bring it into the project already, and then, as you say, it's the team. You have to have. In the case of the bridge, we were very lucky that we had a very technically interested client who wanted to use his laser cutters. We had an architect who discreetly helped us, but let us do the bridge design in a way. And we had a wonderful contractor. So when you're lucky and everything works together, then it goes through and you don't have to put it on any board. You can actually build it, And that's the ideal case that unfortunately does not always happen.
Yes, but sometimes you're lucky and then you have a good example to show.
Exactly.
Also, so Fujimoto,
yeah.
in your case you showed us different projects, always working with this grid. And I had the idea, but maybe I'm wrong, that so you have this really, really strong idea, which is a structure, but also structures the way you are looking for innovation. So actually the form is also the content. And that this strong mental grid and also physical grid kind of helps to make the innovation more mature. So it started small and simple. I mean, it was complex, but the first step was simple. And then it always came to new levels. And I would be interested to know how you come to the next level.
Well, yeah, of course the grid is, especially for today's presentation, the grid was really, really strongly featured. But grid is not only one, like a strong concept of my architecture. I'd rather like to have several different, like a starting point, and which has been achieved through my whole, like a previous career, step by step. And then every time, of course, not only by me, but as a whole team, every time when we got some project, I like to, it's not like choose grid and then adapt it into that project, and then this time choose, I don't know, something, and then it's not like that. Every time for the new project, I just like to open my everything, open my mind, and know any prejudice, just listen to the whole situation, the climate conditions, the physical surroundings, cultural background, history of that city, and so on, the programs and so on, and the budget. And then, every time the whole context finally tell us what it is, and then we can find the proper form or shape or ideas, and so on. So it's not like a pushing something from my side to the project, but every time carefully listen and then find out the hidden link between each different conditions, and then finally we find out. So those kind of how to say. That is why I can continue, because it's it's every time everything is coming from that side. And then it's exciting to find out every time new conditions, new situations, new city, new characteristics. And so, yeah.
Somehow the project and the idea is also just like a plant. It's growing out of the earth, of the humus built made by all those conditions and boundaries that you have there.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting because I mean it needs courage to let grow. I mean we had the example of the concert hall in Sydney, which also grew somehow, and it started to grow, but no one knew how it would look at the end or would be built at the end. And this idea of let grow and have the courage to wait and collect data, collect idea, collect partners, collect inspiration, and really trust that it will grow, it will be good. It has actually a link to nature, because nature is also like this. I mean, life is just growing. There are mutations, so there is always something new, but there's also the old. And they are linked together in a quite complex way. And this is also a thing that I think links the three of you together. This relationship to nature, which is not a dichotomy, so you are not here and having the genius idea and then building it, but you are connected with the idea of learning from nature, adapt it technically, check if it works, with nature, together with nature, working with nature. And that's quite interesting because that also shows that's also one more boundary that falls.
I think you said something important in the word where you said, I think you said trust.
Yes,
you have to have the trust. And I think that's probably fundamental to go along this process, to be that open, to let go your perceptions of how something should be in the end. You can do that only if you share the purpose. I think that was maybe what we said at the beginning. You need to have the common drive, and you have to have that trust in partnerships. To be open to achieve something which you actually are on the journey. It's more an exploration.
Yes.
For me, often the question is where does an idea come from? You know, where does a good idea come from? Where does a winning concept come from? And I agree. One very important issue is getting inspired by nature or looking at nature, not copying it. But there's other issues also, you know, like there's the context in general, which could be completely apart from nature. Or it could be that you're inspired by history, as I said before. Or you could be inspired by some concepts that are technical. So I think it's an entire range of possibilities where you can draw your inspiration from. And I think that's so interesting about our profession, you know, that you, by experience, you broaden the amount of sources you can drink from, so to say.
Yeah, that's true. And then, of course, standing in front of such a wonderful potentials, but of course, at the beginning, we don't know how to understand it. So then we bring some of the existing ideas to adapt it, and then it doesn't work. But we understand slightly why is that, and what kind of the problem and so on. And then sometimes through those kind of a try and error, sometimes new ideas come up to me, for example. But it's not like a coming up from my side, but it's coming up through the interaction between the whole problem and the context and our interventions. So those kind of the repeating intervening and reaction or feedback and interactive struggling, and then gradually ideas is growing. And we couldn't force ideas to some specific directions, but we just can wait, in a sense, and we'll see how this really proper ideas could grow to the proper directions. And that must be, I believe it's also creative in a sense. It's not pushed from my side, but still it is really creative process. It's rather scientific creativity in a sense, but it's also quite creative process, yeah.
And at what time do you open the process to other collaborators? Is it something that happens in your team, in the office?
Well, it depends on the project, but within my team, I open everything from the very beginning, and I hope my team member, from the younger guys to the senior guys, could also bring some inspirations, because more and more inspiration, trial and error happens, then we understand more the situations. And then for the consultant, engineers, consultants, and the landscape designer, lightings, could join on the proper timing, and then new, much different feedback is coming back from the context through the interaction. So the whole process is such an interactive process. Yeah.
But actually, you start within the office, or do you have not architects also in the office?
For now, unfortunately, all of them are architects. But hopefully, yeah, of course, I hope my team member, of course, as a profession, they are architects, but each different characters could have their own tendencies, more engineering, architectural thinkings, or more, how to say, poetic, or each different person has its own characteristics. And but hopefully I like to have really different professions, really different viewpoint to be part of my team. Then we can get more deeper understanding of the whole context, I think. That must be exciting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
May I? I think it's very important that the team starts at an early stage, I think I like it very much if architects call us at an early stage, so that, what you're stacking on top of each other, has also makes some structural sense, Yeah. So I think if an engineer is only called later and is told, look, make it stand up, then I get depressed. So I find it important to start at the early stages to collaborate. That would be my statement regarding that.
Yeah, I agree. I always like to bring structure engineer, sustainability professionals, landscaping engineers could join as early as possible. Then our first step, or our first, for example, 5 hypotheses, could be more rich, could be 10, and much more unexpected from my point of view, but that means much more exciting, I think.
But what happens in these interdisciplinary teams? I mean, on the one hand, you have more people, more knowledge, more ideas, so you have more trials. Do you also have a higher risk, maybe? Or is it kind of an insurance against the risk? Because if you talk about the structure, you already have the structural engineer who can tell you, no, that's not good, or how to improve it. So is it more risk or less risk at the end?
Well, if I may,
what do you think? Yes.
I think it's much less risk. I believe in overall holistic design. So there's this coin, that has make it structure and shape or form and function, on both sides. And these two sides have to merge, and there's new disciplines now. So it's a coin with many faces. But I think for me, the good architecture also needs a good structure, and it needs a holistic quality. And how can you possibly achieve this if one decides everything from the beginning and then call the experts later? To me, that doesn't work. There's a risk of failure that is much bigger if you call the others too late.
But then it would confirm actually what Jan Wurm said, that for each individual, it is a risk to leave its comfort zone and to try to discuss in a discipline that it's not his own or her own. But for the whole project, actually, that's the way to move forward. So for the project, it's less risk and more comfort and more ideas, but for the individual, it is of course, it's also enlightening and gives a new richness of mind, but the first step is sometimes hard.
Well, we were discussing it yesterday about how you enter a collaboration, and it's a cultural, I think, thing. Whether you would, as a consultant, very early on say, "Don't think this works. I think I have other ideas. Do this, do that," or you first of all really listen, wait until you have a complete understanding of the project, and then later on trying to bring in something which then can develop a solution. So the way we work together, I think, has a strong cultural context.
Yeah.
At what point you suggest the solution, at what point you listen. Yeah.
We have also talked about the courage to fail and the culture of errors. So have the courage to fail and have the courage to make errors. Where do you get this courage? And how do you finance it? I mean,
first of all, I think the question of how much risk you take as a person is a really interesting question, I think. Maybe it's a key question. We talk a lot about strategies and what's the right thing to do and what you should do, and you can do all of that. But at the end, the question is, what are you willing to do? Are you going to do it? Are you feeling comfortable or not? So you can have everything there that makes sense, but if you're not taking a certain risk, which you think is possible, I don't think anything is going to happen. So I'm trying to more think about, what risk is it? And I think, we in a big organization, of course, we are protected by our lawyers, by processes, by insurances, by liabilities. But if you just stick into that, I think there's very few things that can happen, right? Because with every decision, you say, actually, if you do that, you're leaving your insurance or your liability clauses. Yeah. So I think in the German planning context, we do have quite a challenge to overcome this. I have worked in England for a couple of years where I experienced a very different approach where a personal risk was shared. It wasn't saying it's your problem and my lawyer is going to talk to your lawyer, but it's how can we do that, how we sort it together. And I think that's so important to work and innovate. Yeah.
I think we are living in very special times right now because this issue of sustainability or CO2 impact or footprint or climate change has really caused a paradigm change. I mean, there was a time where I could not hear this word anymore, but now I'm back to liking it because it opens a whole range of possibilities. For each structure, you really have to think, is it better to have a concrete slab or like you showed, this timber deck, or what do I use as insulating material? And it tremendously increases the risk of failure because there is no simple solution. So I think it's very important that it becomes basically a cultural change, that our society is ready to take risks in order to advance. And naturally, as you said, in Germany, there's lots of people who do not like to take risks and rather go with conventional proven technology. But I think there it's also important to start with education. We have to educate at university level and say, look, let's go for risks because otherwise there's no progress. There is no innovation without risk.
So actually the minds are opening, which is quite positive also.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, no risk, no fun. That's also one thing. But then it really boils down to personal courage is the beginning, and then a more collective courage which can come up with the actual situation and the climate crisis and all the political crises that are happening.
Well, but talking about the actual process, especially the very early process, we don't have any risks in a sense. We don't have any courages to fail because, for example, we start from, 10 different options after doing the whole researches, but we don't know yet what it is. So to understand the whole situation, the whole project, we start from the 10 different hypotheses, 10 different ideas. And then, finally, of course, we reach to the one solutions. Then it means 9 of them fails, but then we achieve one proper ones. So, in a sense, the whole process, we fail more and more than the final achievement. But to get this proper final achievement, we have to fail a lot, more and more and more. And that is not like not dangerous things, no risks. It's like a needed process. And that's.
And I think you have to fail fast, right? That's the key.
Oh, yeah.
Fail fast, learn, fail again until you get it right in the end.
True. That's very important. Because at the last moment, we shouldn't fail because it's building, so it's structure. So we should never fail. And for that kind of a final goal, we have to fail a lot and fast and many failures and learn a lot. That is always very exciting. Yeah.
It is exciting, and also maybe to close on a positive note, maybe this is a place where design could learn from science, because in science, of course, you have to explore a lot of different paths, and most of them are just closed. And it's very hard for the person who has to explore this path and find out after 3 years of research that it's no way. You have to go back and try another one. But for science as a whole, of course, it is a success to know, okay, this is a closed path, we don't try it again, we try something else. So maybe it's also a motivation to try things, regardless of the personal feelings also, but also with a view on the whole. Now I have to close this panel. I'm really sorry about this because it's getting really exciting, but maybe there will be another occasion to talk, maybe also after the panel. If you want to ask questions to the panelists, just try. I think that's not an error. And now I'm very glad to give back to Christian Blaser, our host, and many thanks to all of you, and also for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you all are encouraged for this day and for the future to explore. Thanks for encouraging us. Thanks for the great moderation. And we hope that you come along with us with Architekturdialoge. We have many different lectures and things going on. The next one in April, it's talking about the relation of architecture and the client and how we come to a better built environment in this collaboration with clients. We also visit about 12 new buildings of young architects. All our lectures and organizations are free for you. If you want to become a member or get the information, please sign there at the small table with your address. Thank you very much for coming. Have a good weekend and enjoy the day at Swissbau or wherever you are. And let's come back together again. Thank you very much.